How did you end up watching A Knight's Tale? It's a pretty old movie.
First of all, I don't know how I went this long without seeing it because it has so many things in it that I think I would have loved, especially if I'd seen it like when I was a teenager, like when it was new.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Because you've got Heath Ledger as this knight, he's not a knight at first. He's like a peasant and a squire to an established lord. And he has to kind of fake it till he makes it. And, he takes on this name of
Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein of the Gelderland.
Yes. And, starts entering himself into tournaments with the help of Geoffrey Chaucer, played by Paul Bettany. And they work in all these anachronisms. And, famously the movie opens with all these people at the tournament stomping out "We Will Rock You" by Queen.
Yes.
And there's other like anachronistic kind of music choices and bits of dialogue that don't really fit.
And what would you do with my name, Sir Hunter? Call me a fox, for that is all I am to you.
A fox? Oh, well, then a fox you shall be until I find your name, my foxy lady.
This is also like an interesting movie to watch now because there's a lot of big name people in this. And it was all before like they got famous. So you mentioned Paul Bettany. 2 years later, he did Master and Commander.
Yeah.
And then Mark Addy, we know from Game of Thrones. James Purefoy is in this. Yep. He's in a lot of like these medieval productions. Alan Tudyk is in here. Rufus Sewell is in here.
I think basically they just added it to Netflix and the algorithm just served it up as like a newly added thing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I haven't seen it. I vividly remember seeing it on like the shelves at Blockbuster over the years and just somehow passed it by. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. I mean, parts of it are kind of dumb and, you can debate whether or not the story is fresh enough to really sort of sustain all of the weird little tweaks they make to it in terms of the history. But I don't know. I think the performances are strong enough that it just kind of coasts you through.
Well, like, let's be honest. This is a teen sports movie masquerading as something else.
Yes.
It has this down on his luck main character who's obviously like this handsome man with golden locks, and he somehow, manages to become a knight and gets the girl, and he's got this like loyal cadre of like Robin Hood and his merry band kind of feel to it.
Yes.
If you had seen Heath Ledger as the Joker and you watch this now, you can't really reconcile the two.
No.
This was when Heath Ledger was still like sort of those teen heartthrob type actors, because he did The Patriot and 10 Things I Hate About You just before this. So he had already kind of established himself as a pretty boy. From this movie, you can't tell that he would go on to become this like great character actor. But in retrospect, the fact that he can pull off this role that is super cheesy and make it somehow compelling, I think speaks a lot to his talent that we just didn't realize back in the day.
I also found it odd that his co-star in this, the female lead,
Shannon Sossaman, yeah. She was going to be big too.
Yeah, and she did have like, I mean, it's not like her career is completely like gone sideways or anything. She sort of stayed in the background, kind of like she picked up a handful of roles here and there in movies and TV over the years, and did some sort of like non-screen stuff as well. But
yeah, she later became a musician too.
It is funny to kind of like jump into this movie in like 2001 and then kind of after seeing where all these people ended up and then kind of get this rewind of sorts. If you're seeing it come up on Netflix, especially, I guess if you live in Canada, I don't know if it's the same on on American Netflix or if it's been there for a while. But yeah, if you missed it before, I definitely recommend it. It sounds like Jason recommends it too.
Oh yeah, it's actually one of my favorite films actually in like that genre. I can't believe I've never told you about this film though. Like I feel like I have at some point. If we had talked about Heath Ledger, I would have mentioned this film at some point because this is one of my favorites. One, because it's hilarious, and two, because it's so quotable.
Yeah, and I think I said to you, like when we were planning about talking about this on the pod, obviously we can't really do it now because the actors have all gotten older, but it would have been awesome if the producers behind this had a bit of foresight and they actually turned this into a bit of a cinematic universe. Like, they could, because it is very, very loosely based on the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer.
Yes.
And of course, Paul Bettany plays a fictionalized version of Chaucer in this. So the idea that like, yeah, Paul Bettany would be the linchpin of this loosely connected cinematic universe. Maybe Heath Ledger wouldn't come back in his role, but you would get like Chaucer kind of, you know, falling about the English countryside, collecting these random stories.
So historically, there's always been like a couple years where Chaucer doesn't produce any works and no one knows what he's doing. So this movie was supposed to have meant to like fill in that gap.
Right.
On one final point, though, so the guy who directed this is Brian Helgeland. He actually wrote LA Confidential and Mystic River.
Yes.
And he actually ended up working with Heath Ledger and Shannon Sossman in this sort of like cult thriller called The Order.
I was reading about this. Yeah, I'd never heard of it before. Like you do that kind of thing where you finish watching a movie and then you go back and see sort of like what those actors did later and that kind of thing. And yeah, I had never heard of this thing before. It's like a kind of an exorcism type.
No, it's not
ripoff.
It's not an exorcism, but it has to do with like a secret society.
Right.
And one of their members is murdered and Heath Ledger has to go investigate. And it was supposed to be sort of like a serious film, kind of a launching point to move away from the heartthrob comedy actor that he was known for.
Right.
And it didn't do that well. But if you have a chance, like, you know, it's just interesting to see some of Heath Ledger's early work.
Right.
And how seriously he takes everything. But it didn't do that well. And it's okay. I mean, it's one of those forgettable films. Cult, like, secret society films were popular for a while in the early 2000s. But Heath Ledger at this point wasn't the Heath Ledger that we knew. Like him becoming this really serious character actor came a few years later after this and The Order.
All right.
But I could talk about this movie for ages, but we should probably move on.
Yes, it's the longest cold open ever, but that's kind of a thing with us. So yeah, come on back after the intro and we'll get into some TV and some movies. Welcome to episode 85 of the Extra Buttery podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. This time on the show, we're going to talk about some TV out of the gate. We're going to be getting into The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. Season 2 just launched over this past weekend. Then we'll talk about Netflix's new prestige 50s, 60s era chess drama, The Queen's Gambit. And then we'll close things out with a talk about BORAT Subsequent Movie-Film. You will hear lots of terrible Kazakhstani accents in that segment, so get ready. That's going to be a fun one. But joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chen. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I am total tangent here, but I am just like in the middle of like pumpkin spice everything right now.
Oh my God.
Not the latte.
When did you become a basic girl or basic bitch, I should say? I didn't know you had it in you.
Not the latte. I don't darken the door of a Starbucks unless I'm very desperate, but
good for you.
I'm a key proponent of pumpkin spice baked goods more than anything else. So like pumpkin pie, that's my jam. Anything that I can get that's like pumpkin pie flavored. So I made myself a couple of loaves of this sort of banana bread-esque thing that's just basically like pumpkin pie flavor in a banana bread form.
So it's pumpkin bread.
Pumpkin bread,
saying.
Yeah. And I've also got this like limited edition seasonal ice cream flavored like pumpkin pie with little bits of shortbread crumble in it that you can get from a dairy here in Ontario, Kawartha Dairy. So yeah, I'm just like, I'm up to my eyeballs in this stuff. I feel like it's the only time of the year when it's socially appropriate to be eating all this stuff. So
why wouldn't it be socially appropriate otherwise? Like I think you have pumpkin pie like all the other big holidays, right? Like Thanksgiving, there's pumpkin pie.
Sure. But like, well, it started for me like a couple of weeks ago with Canadian Thanksgiving. That was the first taste of pumpkin pie.
Right.
But I mean, to be honest, I'm probably going to be making pumpkin pies for myself for the rest of the year. Like I don't really observe any kind of cutoff for that. So that's, yeah.
So pumpkin spice, pumpkin loaf, pumpkin bread. Just no thanks. I just think of all the pies you could get, pumpkin pie is not even in my top 10. Not even close.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, and here's a very belabored sort of segue for the jack-o'-lantern that I carved this year for Halloween, which was yesterday, the day we're recording this. I actually did a Baby Yoda design on the pumpkin.
Okay. Why haven't I seen pictures of this? I need evidence.
I'll have to send them to you. They turned out pretty good. I mean, he sort of looks a little bit like a Mogwai from Gremlins, so it's kind of a toss-up.
He looks more like a Jawa.
I'm sure there's pumpkin artists out there that do a much better job, but it felt appropriate because season 2 of The Mandalorian just dropped, or at least the premiere episode of season 2 just dropped this past Friday.
The songs of eons past tell of battles between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called Jedi.
You expect me to search the galaxy and deliver this creature to a race of enemy sorcerers?
This is the way.
This was pretty hotly anticipated, I would say, in the Star Wars community because it's been almost a year since the last Star Wars movie. And if you know Star Wars fans, they're always jonesing for the next hit. And at least The Mandalorian, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be, it's garnered a whole lot more goodwill amongst the Star Wars community.
Well, it's universally praised.
Yeah.
It's not divisive. I haven't heard anything about The Mandalorian that's divisive.
Right.
Like everyone just flat out agrees it's either good or really, really
I figured
good.
I'd pitch that low just to see, just in case.
No, I was, so I'm late on the bandwagon, but I just couldn't resist anymore just because I've signed up for too many streaming services. But I was pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed it. I thought it'd be good because a lot of people say it is. And I usually just take those kind of recommendations with like a healthy amount of skepticism.
Sure.
But I was really surprised how much I enjoyed it. It is a little slow at certain points. But what I love about it is that it has nothing to do with the Skywalker saga, which might change this season. And also because I think and I think this is really debatable, I think more than any other Star Wars movie or TV series, really, it expands on the universe a lot more in terms of like the different factions and the aliens and different groups that are out there. Because before the show, we never really discussed like the Mandalore or the Mandalorians or the Creed and all this other stuff that's going on out there.
Yeah, and certainly like the criminal underworld. Like we always got like in the prequel movies, we got a few flashes of that, with the Jango Fett stuff and the other bounty hunters involved. But it was always through the lens of the Jedi and through the Skywalker kind of arc.
Yeah, or the Republic. Yeah.
Yeah, so you never really got into it and really meet the characters or develop any of those relationships. So yeah, now that we have a show that's fully locked on that world, you're building out not just the bounty hunter guild, but all of the various people that they run into. Of course, the show is set after the destruction of the second Death Star, so you're dealing with the Imperial remnant and these kind of roughed up looking stormtroopers and these leftover generals and commanders and people who are trying to grab a little bit of power, and they're almost like more like organized gangs than anything else.
But I mean, like as we learned in The Force Awakens, the Empire never really went away.
Yeah. So it's like we're kind of waiting to see if, I don't know if The Mandalorian will address this in later seasons, but do you see the First Order kind of come on the scene and start to gather in some of these old Imperial remnants? And do we see that happen on the show, or will that be just in the background the whole time? I don't know.
I hope it's in the background because I really don't want to see it tied to like the Skywalker saga. I think we're done and finished with that. Although like the introduction of the Darksaber and the fact that Ahsoka Tano is going to appear at some point this season, and she's the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker, I think that has potential to tie into the Skywalker story, although I kind of hope it doesn't go down that route. But I think it's more interesting to see what happens with Baby Yoda. We know the Mandalorian is tasked with finding Baby Yoda's home, but I'm not sure if we'll ever find that because as far as we know, Yoda was like the only one of his kind at that point.
Well, except Yaddle.
Who's Yaddle?
That's what that.
Right? This is the first time I've heard of who's Yaddle.
So Yaddle is
Is this the cousin we don't talk about?
locked in a closet somewhere. No, this is Yaddle is a female Jedi who's on the Jedi High Council and is seen in maybe 2 or 3 shots in The Phantom Menace in the background when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan take Anakin to be sort of interviewed or tested by the Jedi High Council. You see Yaddle, so a female of Yoda species with like longer hair and like a brown braid. So she's younger than Yoda. And you see her in the background of a few shots. And then fans sort of seized on this because it confirmed that back in 1999, it was like the first time we'd ever seen any other being from Yoda's species.
Yeah, which we don't even know, like the name of the species. We don't even know what it is.
No. There's been a few kind of rumors that they're the Wills, WHILLS, that George Lucas has referenced in like some draft scripts over the years.
Right.
And that pops up with the character played by Donnie Yen in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He's talking about the Wills, and it's unclear exactly if he's referring to like actual creatures or some sort of spirituality, like Jedi style spirituality. So that's a possibility for like what the species is called. But Yaddle was, as is everything, like, you know, if you want to, there are books and comics and games and things out there in the Star Wars universe that fill in some of these random characters' backstories. So there's a whole backstory that you can read about on Wikipedia for Yaddle if you're so inclined. But they never.
And it's canon, right? Because she shows up in the film, so it's canon.
Yeah, it's canon. It's not some sort of weird legends thing.
Right.
But as for like where she and Yoda come from, they haven't addressed that. So that isn't canon yet.
Right.
And theoretically, the Mandalorian will get there eventually. But in this first episode, he's on a bit of a scavenger hunt because he's told that he doesn't exactly know how to return Baby Yoda to his home planet. He doesn't know anything about the baby. So he's told that he has to track down another Mandalorian. And this sends him first to one planet to kind of like interview this crime boss type guy, who then sends him back to Tatooine, where he'd already been in the first season.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Why does everything interesting in Star Wars happen on Tatooine?
Yes, this is an excellent point. It's something that a few other folks out there, TV commentators have pointed out too. It's a bit of honestly, at this point, it's becoming a bit of a crutch for Star Wars, I think, that,
yes, you know,
Tatooine is supposed to be a backwater. It's supposed to be a place where nothing happens. And yet it's weird how often the shows and the movies go back there. Like it's some sort of...
Is there like a tax credit in where they film it in like Tunisia or something like that?
Probably.
I get that we're limited to what's on Earth. So like we're limited to like rivers, jungles, deserts, you know. And Coruscant is sort of like the cityscape.
Yeah.
So I get why they are limited to these things. I just wonder why it always has to be Tatooine.
I don't know. And to be honest, this opening episode was very similar in some ways to, I think it was the second episode of the first season, where again, the Mandalorian is tasked with taking down some huge monster that's kind of terrorizing a local population.
Instead of a mudhorn this time, it's a crate dragon.
Yeah. Which is another Easter egg for fans because, of course, crate dragons have been talked about in tangentially again in comics and books over the years, and they're supposed to be these monsters that are that live on Tatooine. They're a little bit like sandworms in Dune. You know, they kind of hide out under the sand.
Yep.
So it was kind of cool to see something this like huge and powerful kind of pop up on the show. It was a good obstacle for the Mandalorian to overcome, I guess. But it was very similar to the Mudhorn in terms of like, you know, he comes up with a plan and then it doesn't initially work, and then they kind of react on the fly and they finally take it down.
Well, I think it's one of those premieres where like they're still setting the stage for everything, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't really addressed some of the events that happened in the last episode of the previous season. The sort of two things I want to touch on was that, first of all, the cast. So Timothy Olyphant is the guest star in this episode.
Yes.
And it's consistently amazing how many talented actors and names that Star Wars can pull in. And we saw Amy Sedaris again as the mechanic in Tatooine, and she's hilarious. And I have a feeling she'll stick around for a bit longer too, right?
Yeah, like I could almost see the Mandalorian like getting her to fly off with them to like a different planet or something, and take her on a mission or something. Because I know she lives on Tatooine. It would be kind of annoying if they kept going back to Tatooine over the course of this season. So if they can kind of dig her out of that environment,
with the way the the episode ended, it seems like he's going to be there for a while, or at least that we're going to see Boba Fett follow him around.
True.
So what was your first reaction to Boba Fett actually appearing at the end of the episode?
I hadn't been reading all of the kind of like headlines about this before the season came out. I had heard kind of roughly that Tamura Morrison, who played Jango Fett in the prequels, was cast in an unnamed role. You know, they were like, oh yeah, we cast Tamura Morrison. So
secrecy.
Everyone was like, oh, well, either he's playing Boba Fett and it's the most obvious casting ever, or maybe he's playing like another clone who's, you know, aged up. From the way they're kind of positioning it really does feel like this is Boba Fett. We see him in this kind of black or dark colored robe, and he's got these kind of weapons strapped to his back. And we know that he lost his iconic green armor to the Marshal after crawling out of the Sarlacc pit, we assume. He's not dressed the way he normally is, but I mean, it does make sense. He's the most well-known character to be affiliated with the Mandalorians. We know he's not actually a Mandalorian in terms of like the religion they believe in.
I was just about to say, I hope this series kind of expands on why Boba Fett is so great, because in the movies, he's awful. He does nothing in the movies. I never understood why people love Boba Fett.
Yeah.
I don't get why people like him so much, because he's so lame. Like, he doesn't really kill anyone. It takes him forever to take down Han Solo, and even he can't do it. And he has one of the worst deaths ever for like such a big villain. It's kind of like in Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, where like all of a sudden he gets blown up and that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we come back and build on that, because this Mandalorian sort of creed is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the show.
Unfortunately, there's still a lot of info that enriches your experience of this show that's based on how much of a nerd you are with pre-existing canon. So, you know, if you've watched some of his appearances in some of the animated shows, you've seen him do things that I guess could raise his badass level a little bit in fans' eyes. But yeah, you're totally right. Like the live action performances we've seen him in the original trilogy don't kind of put him in his best light. So yeah, it'd be kind of cool to see him be a bit more of an opponent to our guy. What's the actual Mandalorian's name? Is like Din Djarin or something?
Din Djarin.
Yeah.
Close.
Yeah. We don't see Boba Fett act like a badass when he goes head to head with our Mandalorian. Then I guess that'll be the final verdict on if Boba Fett is actually worth all the trouble.
Can we also just like talk a bit more about like the Mandalorian's relationship with Baby Yoda? I think a lot of people have criticized the Mandalorian because he's always wearing a mask and you can't really see his facial expressions.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's what makes Baby Yoda so great, because he has all these like childish, really easily recognizable faces that he makes. Like if there's dangers, he kind of hides in his little egg pod thing. And then I remember in the previous season when the flamethrower stormtrooper came in and Baby Yoda's face was like, oh my God, we're going to be burnt crisp.
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think just like Baby Yoda, I think is probably like the best thing about the show. I think we can all agree on that, right?
The central mystery of the show is very rightly around him. You know, we want more than anything, I think fans want to know, is there a planet full of his kind out there somewhere? Will Baby Yoda, you know, turn into a Jedi? Will he turn into like a dark side user? We really don't know.
I highly doubt it, but that would be too cruel. The other interesting thing about Baby Yoda is like, why people call him Baby Yoda when clearly it's not Yoda.
Yeah, like technically his official name so far is the child.
Right. And it's just, I think, speaks to the fact that we're in this period of like internet misinformation where if you didn't see the show or if you know nothing about it, you would have assumed it was Baby Yoda, but it's not.
Yeah. And there's been plenty of confusion out there from like casual fans because they, you know, if they don't have a full grip on where exactly we are in the timeline, they could accidentally believe that we are actually in Yoda's past or something, or the Baby Yoda is Yoda's child.
Yeah. So this is the age of misinformation where I think people just kind of latch onto this one idea and it just takes off. And it was never meant to be negative or confusing for people. It just happens to be that way. And we're in this meme culture where everything is boiled down to like a phrase or a hashtag or a photo.
Yeah.
And we just kind of take it for granted. So I always thought it was very interesting that Baby Yoda is kind of like a reflection of who we are and where we are in society because of what we call him.
So then the really interesting time will be when he finally does have a name, and
no one's going to remember the name. Trust me.
well, but will it be divisive though? Is what the thing I'm most interested in, because people.
What isn't divisive about Star Wars?
True, but like, and just imagine like they finally reveal his actual name, and people are in open revolt, and they either suddenly hate the show because they feel like the name is not fitting, or for any number of reasons why people get mad at Star Wars. It would just be funny to me to see what's currently, as you said, a universally acclaimed show kind of go down a few points because people are upset that that whatever they were expecting doesn't live up to the reality of the plot.
Okay, so like one final question then. Why is this so far less divisive than the films, do you think?
Well, I think it gets back to what you were saying about the being so separate from the Skywalker saga. People have this strong emotional connection to that story, whether they liked certain films or hated other ones. Now we have those 9 movies as a unit, and this is not concerned with any of it. So it kind of like, it kind of resets your brain a little bit, or at least it did for me, where it's, it's saying like, forget about all that, here's some new characters, here's some new stakes. We're not worried about planets blowing up or space wizards. In fact, like most of the characters so far in the show have never even heard of Jedi before. They when Baby Yoda waves his hand and makes things float, they have no reference for what that is, which is kind of cool. So yeah, I think it that kind of reset is almost like we're almost like experiencing a whole new cinematic universe, or whole new kind of brand new concept, when it's really just an extension of something that we already know really well.
You know how when something gets too popular, there's always all of a sudden like a backlash to it?
Yeah.
So this, I feel like, is a backlash to the Jedi. Because in all the other iterations, the Jedis were these mythical warriors who are always doing good. And in this show, they specifically call them like evil sorcerers or something like that. So far out of circle of knowledge of most people that people just assume they're these like mythical creatures that don't exist, that there's just legends, that they're something that you shouldn't probably be dabble in at all because it seems so dangerous and otherworldly, even for a place in the galaxy.
Yeah, do you remember that scene in The Last Jedi when Luke kind of lays down the law and kind of explains to Rey all the hypocrisies in the Jedi-Sith duality? And it's honestly, for me, is one of the best scenes in that whole movie, because it strips away any of the kind of the bullshit that the series had gotten high on before, where it was like, oh, everything that the Sith do and everything that the Jedi do are hyper important and you should care about all this stuff, when really it was a lot of just like talking and a lot of like philosophizing.
Well, we finally get gray areas rather than black and white.
Exactly. And that's super interesting. And Luke kind of just says like, hey, the Jedi were full of shit and the Sith exploited that. And it just evens the playing field all of a sudden. And that was honestly the potential that Rise of Skywalker squandered to a large degree, I think. So the Mandalorian is kind of in that same mindset. Forget about all of this stuff that you were told is important, and don't worry about these kind of epic stakes, and just kind of get down and dirty with a story that's a lot easier to wrap your mind around.
Before we go on to the next topic, and because we're so good at going off tangent. That's Sean Connery right behind you, isn't it?
So for the people listening at home, we're on video right now. We're not always on video when we record this show. But yes, I have a framed photo of Sean Connery in his 60s Bond attire on
Rest
my wall.
peace.
And yeah, it feels extra meaningful now because he has kicked the bucket as of
this morning.
Hate to see that, of course. He's a cinematic legend of many different genres. And
what a wild year for Bond, eh?
yeah.
Like, first of all, we get the delays, then we get Daniel Craig's last film, then we get speculation on who James Bond, the next Bond, will be, and then we get news that Sean Connery died. So,
yeah.
I mean, do you have any words of eulogy for your favorite Bond? Is he your favorite Bond?
Yeah, I have to say he probably is, and it's probably not a super original take, but yeah, there's something about the actor who kind of originates a role that's, been with us for 60 years.
Incredible 60 years.
There's got to be some life in the series if it's lasted this long. And I think a lot of that has to do with the kind of the way Connery kind of carved out that space in pop culture with his original performance. You say what you will about like the sexual politics and all of the stuff from those movies being very retro by our standards today. You know, it's one of the reasons I like having the portrait on my wall is it's kind of like, yeah, there's like, you know, if I'm getting up and I'm getting dressed in the morning and, you know, that's a little kind of reminder to just kind of like look your best and, you know, maybe not try to strangle women with their bikini tops the way he does, I think like From Russia with Love or something. But yeah, just, you know, think a little bit about being the kind of clean cut, gentlemanly kind of thing that he put forward, at least when it suited his character.
Are you not afraid that when you bring a girl to your bedroom, she'll see that picture and be like, I'd rather be with him than you?
Yes.
You better live up to that, Robert Snow.
Yeah. That could cross your mind. That's true. The other question that kind of occurs to me is, what do you think is the chances that Connery actually kept up with the most recent films, like the Daniel Craig films or even the ones that came before? Because he really struck a kind of note in his later years of being a pretty cranky old guy who didn't really...
I think he was a cranky young guy. It's very unlike Roger Moore. I think Roger Moore really embraced James Bond as like one of his buddies, because in interviews he often refers to him as Jimmy, which always really bugged me. Jimmy Bond. I'm like, dude, you're not that tight. Plus he's fictional, so you need to get your brain checked. Pierce Brosnan, I think in recent years has I think understood that it kind of helped propel his career, but he's really strayed away from that hero movie role that he was when he was playing Bond. Yeah. So and Sean Connery always struck me as the guy who always thought that I am the true Bond and no one else is. This is my character that you've only taken over. And so I don't care what you do because what I do will always remain the best. That's the feeling he always gave me.
And he had his own issues with the way Eon Productions kind of went on to use the character, because he infamously made Never Say Never Again.
Right. Yes.
The unofficial Bond film, which was after George Lazenby made On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
He was like 50 years old by then, I think, wasn't he? Like 40 or 50? And Kim Basinger was like 20.
That's the one Bond film I haven't seen. And I've always...
You haven't seen it?
No. And I've always wrestled with...
Watch it.
But I feel bad because I know the circumstances over why it was made and how it was sort of made as like a spiteful film. Like it wasn't made to advance the character or to kind of do anything worthwhile. It was just a big middle finger to Eon and you know what they were.
The best advice I could give you is to basically, one, watch it, and two, watch it but come at it at an angle where this is not the first Sean Connery Bond, but this is another interpretation of Bond as played by Sean Connery. I think that's the best way to approach it.
Well, staying on like 60s pathway timeline, we've got a new show that just hit Netflix, The Queen's Gambit.
Right.
This is a show that I think Netflix picked it up. I'm not totally clear on the production history of it. If it was developed for Netflix or if they bought it after it had been in production for a bit. But it's a limited series, 7 episodes, starring Anya Taylor-Joy, whose career has just been like a total rocket ship the past couple of years.
Your favorite?
Yeah, definitely a personal favorite of mine. It's all about chess in the 1960s.
And drugs.
Oh, well, yeah.
Drugs and alcohol. That's the best part about the show. Come on, Rob.
Yeah, it's the closest that the chess world comes to kind of like a rock and roll lifestyle until I guess Bobby Fischer.
Okay.
But he comes along a bit later. And I, to be honest, I mean, other than Bobby Fischer and who's the Russian grandmaster who played against Fischer famously?
Something that ends with ski.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Sorry.
They had an epic showdown in the 80s or whenever it was before Fischer kind of lost his mind. But other than Fischer's story, this is the only other like kind of major chess story to be adapted in this kind of production level in the past little while.
You're an orphan, Beth.
I'm fine being alone. I feel safe in an entire world of just 64 squares.
How creativity and psychosis often go hand in hand. Or for that matter, genius and madness.
it deals with this girl, Beth Harmon, who is an orphan. And she's, when the show picks up, she's brought to an orphanage. And we discovered that her mother, before she died, was a successful mathematician with a PhD. And
successful.
Oh, well, you know, she had published some works, and she was quite skilled in her field. Maybe she sort of squandered that, but that kind of leads us to believe that Beth will grow up to have similar skills of kind of analytical, that whole mindset. And when she's at the orphanage, we can tell that she's not the best at making friends. She's not the most sociable, but she slowly befriends the janitor at the orphanage, played by Bill Camp, who is a hardcore fan of chess. And we see him playing chess, playing himself down in the basement in his free time. And slowly Beth gets more and more interested in this. And she finally convinces Bill Camp's character to teach her how to play. And at the same time this is happening, we find out that the orphanage is being super retro and deciding that the only way to handle their kids is to feed them a daily dose of tranquilizer, these little green pills.
Yum.
And there's another girl at the orphanage, Jolene, who sort of acts as like a big sister to Beth. And she shows Beth how you can conceal the fact that you haven't consumed the tranquilizer when you're supposed to, and build up a stash of them and then take them. And then you kind of get a rush from it or like a high. And this kind of seems to unlock Beth's chess playing powers. It kind of allows her to sort of cut through the noise and see moves and things that she otherwise might not.
Think of it as like the spinach to her Popeye chess playing skills.
Yeah, that's a good, and it's appropriate because it's green, right?
Yeah.
I've watched the first 2 episodes of this now.
Okay.
And at the end of the second episode, you see that her career is sort of right about to take off. You know, she's won her first major tournament. She's beat the local state champion. And based on the trailer that I saw before I started watching, I know that eventually, you know, her career really does take off, and she ends up taking on, you know, national champions and going on to become a grandmaster. But her drugs and alcohol problem follows her along this way. So you've watched the whole thing now, without getting too into detail with the spoilers. What did you think of the series as a whole?
It was an excellent show. I think the tendency with a lot of these TV shows is to withhold information so they can create new or more episodes.
Right.
I think The Mandalorian's kind of guilty of this too, where they could just give you the information right away, but they hold it back to make you keep watching. And so in the middle, there's a bit of a lull where Beth really gets addicted to alcohol and drugs. And that's all that sort of the episodes kind of revolve around, her addiction issues. And granted, that's a big theme in the show. But overall, you go from Beth as an 8-year-old to her as an adult in the final chess match against this Russian grandmaster. Throughout all of this, there are characters that kind of weave in and out of the story. So it's well contained. And overall, I think there are 2 things that really, I think, make this show stand out. First of all, it's the production value. I think everything from the costumes to the sets to the decoration is so on point. It is so awesome to look at. It is literally eye candy. Because every time you look at the screen, it's either Beth's clothes, it's either the setting, like the orphanage itself, or even just the chessboard. I think the way they visualized her playing chess in her mind with tiles on the ceiling and the pieces kind of flashing and moving around, I thought that was really fantastic. It kind of goes away for a while, but then it comes back, and it's really become sort of like, you know how in superhero movies there's always like a training montage?
Yes.
That's her training montage.
Oh,
It's a very interesting way they do that. The second thing that stands out is Anya Taylor-Joy. So whenever you see her performance, there's actually like 2 parts to it, I think. One is her, like her physical performance itself. The second is her eyes. Her eyes are so big and so like, I think, responsive that you can always tell what she's thinking just by looking at her eyes. And because her eyes are so big and the pupils are so big, you do believe that she's kind of on drugs. And she's always like managed so far in her career to play characters that are always aloof or on the edge or very incredibly smart. Very much an outsider and outcast, but a very intelligent one at that.
I guess it's something that she's sort of drawn to as a performer. You know,
she cannot play the like damsel in distress. I really don't think that's her, and she doesn't look that part. So right away, because feminism is such a big sort of theme in the show as well, she's got this really strong facade to her. They kind of write it off as sort of like a social tick or the part of her, I guess, mental disorder, because she suffers from addiction issues, obviously. She's always played characters that way. She's never played a straight, girl next door type.
No, that's true. And somebody else pointed out, I think this popped up on Twitter somewhere, but the one of the nice things about this show in terms of like the female empowerment angle is how it doesn't necessarily go that down the route of like seeing a bunch of dudes crowding around and then getting angry when Beth is successful in a match. They seem to pick up on this idea that, at least in the chess world, or in the version of the chess world that we're seeing in the show, there's a lot of like camaraderie and respect for skill, regardless of a person's gender. And I mean, who knows if that's
very welcoming.
Who knows if that's actually like 100% accurate, but it does kind of tie in with the game itself, which people. I'm not a chess player really. I've learned how to play it when I was a kid, but I haven't barely touched it in the past like 10 or 15 years, and I was never very good. But there's one thing that you kind of learn about chess is that it has a kind of a cold analytical sort of character to it.
That's a good point.
It doesn't really kind of play host to sort of passionate outbursts and misogyny and kind of things that you might expect from this sort of story, where you have a female character who's kind of rising up through a boys' club.
There's nothing supernatural about what Beth Harmon does. She's just this really insanely smart person who has this one special talent, but is very flawed for that reason. I highly recommend it. Anya Taylor-Joy herself is, I think, a big draw for this show. And I imagine this show is going to win or at least get nominated for a ton of awards when the time comes.
Yeah, I can see it picking up Emmys in a lot of categories, and it's I can see why Netflix picked it up for sure. So highly recommended for me, even though I've only seen the first 2 episodes. And yeah, we'll circle back around once I've finished
Tangent.
it. Yeah. Okay.
Tangent time. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so this show is based on a novel published in 1983 by Walter Tevis.
Okay.
So ever since this novel was published, it had always been, people have tried to adapt it into a film or a TV series. Now, for the longest time, people tried, but they couldn't do it, except until the late 2000s, when it really felt like this project was going to go underway. The director attached to that to turn this into a film was actually Heath Ledger.
Whoa.
And it was supposed to be his directorial debut.
Really?
In 2008, yes.
Interesting.
And because of his untimely death, this whole film was shelved for, obvious reasons. The girl who was rumored to be playing Beth Harmon is actually Ellen Page. So imagine how different it would have turned out. And if you think about where Heath Ledger was in his career, the issues that Beth has with alcoholism and drug addiction is very much a mirror of what Heath Ledger was going through at the time.
Yeah.
So I wonder what his creative vision would have been. I think that would have been really, really interesting.
Well, I mean, this episode is turning into the Heath Ledger Appreciation Hour, so that's not a bad thing, and it's that's a detail that I was completely unaware of. So I'm trying to think of a segue now.
There is no segue for Borat. There is no proper segue. Very nice.
We're trying to get into Borat, and it's just not going to work. Not from the show like that. But yeah, so Sacha Baron Cohen has brought Borat back in time for the U.S. federal election, and he made a very strong point about that. He feels like that character is as he proved in the first film that came out in 2006, wasn't it? That character is kind of like uniquely skilled at sort of peeling back the layers of American society and kind of poking fun at it.
14 years ago, I released a movie film which brought great shame to Kazakhstan. but now I was instructed to return to Yankee Land to carry out secret mission.
I go to America! It feels like people sort of rallied around this sequel in a way that I didn't totally expect. I when they announced that the movie was coming out, I was kind of like 50-50 on it. I was like, oh, I could see it being fine. I could see it being kind of boring. It sort of really depends on what he does with it. I mean, I laughed enough. I found it fun enough. I didn't.
What did you think of the first film, though?
I like the first film. It's not exactly my sense of humor.
That was what I thought. I was like, I don't know if this is the kind of comedy that Robert Snow would like. It's a little too lowbrow.
The lowbrow stuff is the stuff that I don't really engage with. I like the surrealist stuff, especially like the sheer amount of imagination that goes into the kind of fictional version of Kazakhstan that Sacha Baron Cohen has come up with. All of the bizarre mythology that he's kind of created for this very, very fantastical country, which he's said in interviews, he picked Kazakhstan because it was a country that he figured most Americans had absolutely no information about, and he could he could create this sort of totally mysterious place that would put his interview subjects completely off guard. So,
right.
And so in the first one, the cringe comedy stuff, I was like, I didn't totally engage with that. But some of the absolutely nutty stuff, like the anti-Semitic kind of rants about the running of the Jew in Kazakhstan.
Right. The cockroaches and everything.
With the cockroaches. And probably my absolute favorite moment from the first movie was when the bear is in the ice cream truck that they're driving around. And the kids go up to the window and they expect an ice cream guy to come out, and it's just a bear roaring at them. That was a great moment. And then of course the naked fight with Borat's producer,
Azamat. Yes.
So in the second one, of course, he has to kind of lay a lot of groundwork off the top, because he has to explain where Borat has been this whole time. He needs to also kind of address the fact that his character is too well known in the United States now, so it's too easy to get recognized on the street, and how he eventually has to come up with more elaborate disguises to cover the fact that he's actually Borat. So it's a little bit of that kind of Robert Downey Jr. and Tropic Thunder sort of situation where he's playing Borat, who's also playing somebody else.
Right, but it's also like kind of tied into the production history, because Borat has become so popular that he couldn't film it without it getting ruined. So he had to think of ways on the spot to essentially make this movie, but still maintain the integrity of the character.
Yeah.
So there's a sequence at the end of the film where he's trying to film scenes, he's trying to pull pranks, but people on the street instantly recognize him as Borat. And so he's actually running away, and that's all real and stuff. So I think part of the miracle of this movie is the fact that he actually even got it made, because this was filmed during the pandemic, which threw all sorts of wrenches into their production. He had to face constant challenges of being recognized. And I think just the fact that they were able to even make a coherent movie is a feat in itself. Like, broadly speaking, the plot doesn't make any sense.
That's true.
Like, it changes titles even, like to different parts of the movie, because they had to change certain things because the original script or the original pranks they had written for it could no longer work.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the part where he's holed up with, I think they're actually QAnon supporters, aren't they?
Yeah, these like two kind of like alt-right guys who are he's in this he's kind of quarantining with them.
Yeah, so apparently that was like spur of the moment. He had to stay in character for like 5 or 6 days straight just to pull that off.
The only part of that and this was one of my biggest questions coming out of this movie, was in that segment in particular, I still don't understand how those two guys didn't recognize him at all. Because they feel like
recognize him as Sacha Baron Cohen, or recognize him as like a character.
Well, both, because they seem to be, they're not complete country bumpkins. They know how to use the internet. But
see, I think this is the genius of Borat. Borat has always been a comedian for the left. Like, if you're right or alt-right, Borat doesn't really register on your radar because the characters he came up with even before that, like from the Ali G show, was always catered towards a younger demographic. And the younger demographic skews liberal and Democrat, right?
Sure.
So it makes a lot of sense to me that, you know, that they don't recognize him, because this happens a lot in the first film too, where people don't realize they're being pranked.
Right.
And I think it shows two things. One, it shows how gullible people are, but also if you spin it, it shows how receptive towards other people we are, or we can be, even if we're alt-right or whatever. The second is Borat likes to joke that he's the number 4 journalist in all of Kazakhstan, but he has a way of like revealing people's true intentions, or at least like pushing them into a corner until they misspeak or they do something really terrible, like Rudy Giuliani does, right?
Yeah.
Or he makes people admit things that they probably would not reveal to people in the general public. And I think that's what makes him such a good journalist. Like, if he's number 4 in Kazakhstan, the top journalist in Kazakhstan must be like the best journalist in the world. The one guy who could get the truth out of anybody.
Yeah.
And so like, I remember I texted you about this too, about like, because we know how Borat was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay in 2007.
This was news to me.
movie.
I completely forgot that this happened. And I mean, I don't want to say that I'm hating on Borat for being surprised that it was in contention for an Oscar. But it just, to me, it doesn't connect with my kind of picture of the types of movies that get nominated in that category.
Yeah. So this is like my sort of crazy wild prediction / theory, because Borat has always been like a comedian for the left. If Biden wins, I think Borat deserves some credit for at least providing public opinion and commentary and being like at least a force, that a measurable force in this election. I think Borat has always been really good at being political without saying anything outright political, other than, you know, like the obvious misogynistic jokes and stuff, which Sacha Baron Cohen obviously does not believe. Borat is kind of like the Pied Piper. He kind of leads you down this path that you kind of have no turning back.
Right.
And this is the US election that we're in. We're heading down a road that we may potentially never be able to go back down, because Roe versus Wade is being challenged. The Affordable Care Act is being challenged. And so I don't think it's any coincidence that Sacha Baron Cohen, who's like this really intelligent guy, brought this character back just in time for this election. I don't know how far in advance he had planned this, but it does sound like he did make this movie in time for the election. Like, there was a reason it needed to be sold in September and released in October.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that Borat 2 gets nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay again, because as we all know, Hollywood loves patting itself on its back, and because of the Oscar So White scandal, wants to be viewed as progressive and liberal. If Biden wins, what better way to say F you to the old institutions by letting Borat win Best Adapted Screenplay?
I mean, I don't want to rule it out, because this has been a year of no rules. So I won't argue that point. I can... knowing that the first one was nominated in that category, I could definitely see this getting nominated. Whether or not it wins is for me is a total toss up at this point. I think I'd have to wait and see what it gets nominated against. But yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment.
The flip side is, if Trump wins, Borat and his political sort of like punditry and consciousness and pop culture, I think, starts to fade, because whatever effect that he wanted to make. So basically, you know, vote. Obviously, I think he's left leaning.
Oh yeah.
If Trump wins, I think Borat becomes sort of brushed aside as a caricature comedian, a guy who comes in, makes a lot of jokes, but says nothing either way. So I think in some way, this U.S. election is actually also a testament to Borat's future sort of spot or memory, I guess, in our pop culture.
And it also suggests, too, that the attempt at kind of changing people's minds with comedy and by using comedy to reveal the foibles of this party and the terrible stuff that they've kind of espoused under Trump. It suggests that these people are kind of Teflon, a little bit like Trump himself. No matter what you throw at them, that they still are able to cling to power. So
this goes back to my original point about Borat being like revealing the truest form of people. And if him revealing these like racist conspiracy theory people for what they are isn't a strong enough message, then I don't know what is. I think his comedy takes away from that a little bit for sure. But this is why I think Borat should be #1 journalist in all of the world, because no one gets the reactions he does. As stupid or as uneducated as Borat is made to seem, he asks really, really good questions, I think, sometimes.
He comes at it with this kind of like childlike innocence that it causes people to, his targets, to kind of over-explain themselves and reveal their darkest beliefs in the process. And it's a method that no established legitimate journalist would ever do. Mm-hmm. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the things that this sequel has going for it is that it does introduce some new elements that expand the world a little bit, namely Borat's daughter, played by played by this Bulgarian actress Maria Baklova, I think her name is. They kind of like double their money in a way, because they not only get a character who's a bit of an American neophyte, doesn't know how the way the U.S. works, which is kind of what we got in the first one. So we get that bit of that kind of fish out of water experience that powered the first movie a little bit. Mm-hmm. But we also get this father-daughter dynamic that is actually, it's got a nice arc to it. They start out being like Borat treats his daughter like an animal, because that's the way fictional Kazakhstanis do in this universe. And then slowly, his heart warms a little bit, and he sees that the Kazakhstani way of treating women is rather poor and awful, and starts giving her like little treats and things, and eventually helping her become an independent woman on her own, and single-handedly fixing an entire society because they have that sequence where it's now the anti-maskers versus the Fauci doll instead of the running of the Jew. We're recording this 2 days before the election. By the time this podcast goes out, we may or may not know what the results of the election are. It's one of the rare cases where we're not actually dating the podcast because of referencing current events, because we really don't know how all the votes are going to kind of tabulate, how long it's going to take to count them, all of the probable lawsuits and fighting and stuff. So all of that being said, I think BORAT Subsequent Movie Film will kind of endure as if nothing else, a little bit of a time capsule of this particular point at which it was released, before the actual results of the election started to come in. So a strong recommendation for me. Mm-hmm. But I think that about does it for this episode. The podcast is available to listen on all of your favorite podcast platforms. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on Anchor. If you've been listening on Anchor, that's up-and-coming platform as part of the Spotify family. And if you're on any of those platforms and you're liking what you're hearing on this, give us a little rating, help us rise the ladder a little bit to help other people find the show. So we always really appreciate that. And you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at JRobertSnow, and Jason is at JasonChen16. And until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.